He chose his son's birthday to remind her what kind of man he was. The backyard looked like something torn from a magazine spread, all pale blue balloons, white folding chairs, and a three-tier cake frosted in smooth buttercream beneath a banner that read Happy Eights, Ethan in glittering silver letters. Children ran across the lawn with paper crowns sliding over their eyes, their sneakers kicking through bright strips of confetti. A rented petting zoo stood near the far fence. A face painter worked beneath a striped tent. Somewhere behind the dessert table, a Bluetooth speaker played cheerful pop music just loud enough to cover the tension that had followed Claire Bennett from the moment she stepped through the gate. She had arrived 20 minutes early with a neatly wrapped box in one hand and Ethan's favorite blue cardigan folded over her arm, because the April breeze still carried a little chill once the sun dipped. She crouched beside her son near the gift table and straightened the collar of his shirt with calm fingers. Ethan smelled like soap, sunshine, and the vanilla icing he had already tried to sneak before the candles were lit. "Do I look okay?" he whispered, tugging at the hem of his sleeves. Claire smiled and brushed a crumb from his cheek. "You look perfect, sweetheart." It was the kind of answer mothers gave when they knew a child was asking for more than an opinion. He was asking if the day would stay soft. He was asking if the adults would behave. He was asking if everyone could pretend, for just 2 hours, that broken families didn't come with sharp edges. Jason Bennett arrived late enough to be noticed and confidently enough to make it seem intentional. He walked in wearing a fitted navy blazer with no tie, sunglasses still on, one hand resting at the waist of the woman beside him, as if they were entering a country club luncheon instead of their son's birthday party. Vanessa Cole's laugh floated ahead of them like perfume. Jason lifted his chin when he saw Claire, and that familiar look crossed his face, the one that always seemed halfway between amusement and contempt, as if her existence had once disappointed him and never stopped.
"There
she is," he said, loud enough for nearby parents to hear. Ethan's mom made it. Claire said nothing. She had spent too many years learning that silence was sometimes the only room dignity had left to stand in. Jason bent down to hug Ethan, all bright teeth and easy charm, then straightened and looked at the cake. "Nice," he said, though the word came out like a verdict. "Simple. Very you." Vanessa smiled into her paper cup and added, "It's sweet. Kind of old-fashioned, but sweet." Claire adjusted the plates near the table, her face unreadable. The children were called over. Parents gathered in a loose semicircle, some lifting phones. Ethan climbed onto the small wooden box set beside the cake, so he could reach the candles better. The flames trembled in the wind. Claire moved closer, one hand lightly at her son's back to steady him. Jason came up on Ethan's other side and suddenly grinned at the crowd.
"Come on," he said.
"Let's get the whole family in here." There was that thin edge in his voice now, the one Claire knew too well. She turned slightly, not out of trust but out of habit, and in the next second, he reached toward her with a clownish, careless motion that made a few guests think he was joking. Frosting brushed her cheek first, cold and sugary, then more of it smeared across the side of her face as her balance shifted. It happened fast, not violent, not chaotic, just humiliating in the precise way only certain men knew how to be when they wanted a room to laugh with them instead of at them. A few people did. A few gasped. One phone lowered. The music kept playing. Claire lifted her head slowly, white icing clinging to her hairline and the corner of her mouth. Across from her, Jason was already laughing. But Claire didn't look at him first. She looked at Ethan. Her son stood frozen beside the candles, his small hand curled tight at his side, his face gone pale with confusion and hurt. And in that instant, with sugar on her skin and the whole party holding its breath, Claire understood the real damage had nothing to do with the cake at all. The room did not know what to do with a child's silence. That was what settled over the yard more heavily than the music, more heavily than the sweet smell of buttercream warming in the afternoon sun. Ethan stood beside the cake, as if the ground had shifted beneath his sneakers, his candles still burning, his birthday crown tilted slightly to one side. Claire wiped a small streak of icing from the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand and gave him the gentlest smile she could find, the kind that cost her something. "Hey," she said softly, stepping closer. "You still have a wish to make." Her voice was even.
No tremor. No crack.
No sign that the moment had cut through her pride like cold glass. Ethan looked at her, then at his father, then back at the cake, unsure which face he was supposed to trust. Jason, still riding the last shallow ripple of laughter, spread his hands as if it had all been harmless fun. "Come on," he said to the crowd. "It was a joke. Lighten up." Vanessa let out a quick little laugh beside him, but it fell flat now. A few parents exchanged looks over paper plates and juice boxes. One mother quietly lowered her phone. Another turned toward her husband with the expression people wear when they realize they have stayed too long at someone else's disaster. Claire placed both hands on Ethan's shoulders and turned him gently toward the candles. "Go ahead, sweetheart," she whispered, "before the wind gets them." Ethan took a shaky breath and blew. The flames went out at once. A few people clapped, hesitant at first, then louder, grateful for something normal to do with their hands. Claire joined in. So did Jason. So did Vanessa. It was that strange kind of applause people offer when they are not celebrating, only covering something ugly with noise. Claire reached for the cake knife, then paused when Ethan grabbed her wrist. "Mom," he said, barely above a whisper. It was not a question. It was not even a full sentence. Just one word, carrying all the confusion an 8-year-old could hold. Claire bent down until her face was level with his. A little frosting still clung near her temple, but she did not rush to clean it. "I am okay," she told him. "Today is still your day." He searched her expression, and children always knew more than adults wanted. Them too. He knew she was not okay. He knew she was choosing something anyway. Claire kissed his forehead, picked up the knife, and guided his hand through the first slice. Vanilla layers, raspberry filling, silver sugar pearls along the edge. The details suddenly looked absurd to her. All that effort poured into something so delicate, something one careless gesture could ruin in seconds. Still, she kept cutting. Still, she handed out plates. Still, she thanked people for coming. That was the part Jason had never understood about her. He thought composure meant weakness because he had confused loudness with power for most of his life. He had always liked rooms where he could be the center of gravity, where his jokes landed, where his charm moved first and truth came later. When they were married, Claire had watched him work a dinner table the way some men worked a sales floor, smiling just long enough, touching shoulders, knowing exactly when to lean in and when to pull back. People called him magnetic. Claire had once called him safe. She had been wrong. The marriage had not collapsed in one dramatic moment. It had thinned out over time, like a rope rubbed raw from the same point every day. First came the little corrections in public. Then the jokes at her expense, offered with a grin so no one could object without sounding humorless. Then the nights he came home late and acted insulted if she asked whether he had eaten. Then the way he began introducing her to people without saying anything real about her at all, as if she were furniture that matched the house but did not belong in the story. By the end, Jason had not needed to shout to make Claire feel small. He only needed an audience. And now, standing in their son's birthday party with frosting drying against her skin, Claire understood something with a clarity that almost calmed her. Ethan had seen enough. Not enough to make him hard, she prayed, but enough to remember. Enough to one day ask himself what kind of man laughs first and checks on his child second. She turned as one of the servers offered a stack of napkins. "Thank you," she said, taking them with steady fingers. Then she walked toward Ethan. Again, carrying his slice of cake as if nothing sacred had been disturbed, while Jason stood a few feet away still smiling at a room that was no longer smiling back. By the time the last paper plate was gone and the rental crew began folding tables, the sky had turned the pale gold of early evening, the kind of light that made everything look gentler than it was. Ethan sat on the back steps with an unopened box of party favors in his lap, his blue cardigan buttoned wrong. Claire noticed him while she stood by the dessert table, stacking unused napkins and sealing leftover cookies into plastic containers. It looked like tidying. It felt like survival. Near the gate, Jason stood with Vanessa, half laughing, half complaining to a caterer, still carrying himself with the careless ease of a man who believed time always cleaned up after him. Claire had once mistaken that for strength. Now she knew better. She crossed the yard and sat beside Ethan on the warm wooden steps. He stared at the lawn where a few burst balloons dragged in the breeze. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked in a small voice.
Claire turned to him at once.
"No," she said.
No, sweetheart.
"Not one thing." He nodded, but his face stayed tight. Then why was Dad acting like that? Claire looked at his hands pressing into the cardboard box and felt the real fear settle in. Not the embarrassment, not the memory of the cake. The fear that Ethan might grow up thinking cruelty was harmless if it came wrapped in a joke. She gently took the box from his lap. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that have nothing to do with the people around them," she said. "Sometimes they do something unkind because they want attention, or because they want to feel bigger than they are." Ethan finally looked at her, his eyes still red at the edges. "Was he making fun of you?" Claire could have softened it, but children always remembered dishonesty. "Yes," she said quietly. "He was." Ethan swallowed. "I did not like it." Claire reached for his hand. "Neither did I." He leaned against her then, just enough to tell the truth without words. Claire closed her eyes for a moment and let the evening settle around them. This was what mattered. Not Jason. Not Vanessa. Not the whispers that would move through school pickup lines by morning. Just this small shoulder beside hers, and the chance to teach her son the right lesson from the wrong moment. She fixed Ethan's cardigan, unbuttoning it and fastening it the right way. "Listen to me," she said. "You never have to laugh when something feels mean.
Not to fit in.
Not to make somebody else comfortable. And you never have to become unkind just because someone older than you is." Ethan watched her seriously. "Okay," he whispered. Claire smiled, but there was steel beneath it now. She stood and held out her hand. Ethan took it. Together they walked back across the lawn toward the gate, past empty juice boxes and folding chairs and the half-deflated balloon arch swaying in the breeze. Jason noticed them and straightened, as if expecting one more scene. But Claire only picked up Ethan's backpack and slipped the strap over her shoulder. Then she looked at Jason with a calmness so complete it unsettled him more than tears ever could. "I will have Ethan home by 8, she said. "Nothing else."
No accusation.
No raised voice. Just a boundary, clean and cold. Jason opened his mouth, perhaps to joke again, perhaps to smooth things over. But Claire did not wait. She guided Ethan through the gate and toward her car beneath the maple tree at the curb, where the first evening shadows stretched across the street. Behind her, the party looked smaller now. Smaller, sadder, cheaper somehow. And for the first time all day, Claire felt something steadier than pain rising inside her. Not revenge. Just clarity. The kind that comes when a woman stops asking how much more she can endure and starts deciding what her child must never see again. That night, after Ethan fell asleep with the hallway light still on, Claire stood alone in her kitchen and let the silence settle. The apartment was modest and carefully kept, the dishwasher humming softly, a single lamp glowing over the stove. Her blouse from the party was already in the wash, yet she could still feel the ghost of frosting at her temple, as if humiliation clung longer than the mess itself. She poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, not from exhaustion, but because memory always arrived strongest when the house stopped asking anything from her. People imagined broken marriages ending in one dramatic moment, but hers had unraveled quietly, one thread at a time. In the beginning, Jason had been charming, attentive, the kind of man who could warm a room with ease. He admired Claire's calm before he learned how useful it was to diminish it. The change came slowly. Jokes at dinner about how long she took to decide, even when she had planned the entire evening. Introductions that made her sound lucky and passive, as if caring for a home and child were effortless. A hand at her back that looked tender from a distance, but tightened whenever he wanted her silent. The phrase he used most was always the same. "You are too sensitive." He said it when he mocked her, when he forgot Ethan's recital, when he came home late and made her concerns sound unreasonable. Over time, The sentence became a way of making her doubt herself. Jason did not need open cruelty. He preferred the kind that could still pass for charm. He interrupted, minimized, and made her feel as though gratitude was expected while her needs were a burden. When Ethan was born, Claire hoped fatherhood might soften him. For a while, he played the part well. He held the baby at parties, kissed her forehead in front of family, and looked like devotion in photographs. But private life exposed what public appearances could not hide. The late nights returned. So did the irritation, the casual humiliations, the way he acted as though responsibility were an inconvenience and her presence interrupted some better life waiting outside their front door. Claire kept choosing composure because she thought endurance meant love. She believed stability could save a home. But standing still inside someone else's disrespect does not save anything. It only teaches them how much of your dignity they can spend. In the dim kitchen, Claire looked down the hallway toward Ethan's room and understood something with painful clarity. Jason had not changed in one afternoon beside a birthday cake. He had only become more public about what he had always been. And for the first time, Claire was done mistaking survival for peace. The next morning arrived with the mercy of routine. At 7:15, Claire packed Ethan's lunch at the kitchen counter while rain tapped softly against the window and the coffee maker clicked in the background. Ethan sat nearby in his socks, bent over a forgotten math worksheet, his pencil drifting whenever his mind wandered. Nothing in the room suggested old money or a family name spoken with lowered voices. That had always been the point. Claire had built this life on purpose, choosing what was simple, because simple felt honest. No society photographs. No silver trays. No trace that before she had been Claire Bennett, she had once been Claire Sinclair. The name still existed only in documents locked away in a fireproof folder behind tax returns and Ethan's birth certificate. Sinclair was the kind of name that opened doors in cities Claire had left behind. Her father, William Sinclair, did not wear wealth loudly. He existed in the quiet architecture of ownership, where buildings carried other names and power moved without spectacle. Claire had inherited his eyes, but not his hunger for control. At 26, she had walked away from a Manhattan life of private elevators and family offices to marry Jason, wanting to be loved before she was measured. She did not hide her past from shame. She hid it because she wanted someone to see her without calculating what came with her. Jason never asked much. He liked the version of Claire that arrived without visible power. He liked being the larger story in the room. So she let the rest stay buried. She ignored invitations, declined galas, and kept her distance from the world she had left. When William called, his words were brief but never cold. He asked about Ethan. He asked whether she was well. He never once said, "I told you so." She had not seen him in person for nearly 3 years, not since a quiet lunch in Boston when Ethan, then 5, told him grandfathers should smile more, and William actually had. As Claire helped Ethan with his rain jacket, her phone lit up on the counter. Unknown number. Manhattan area code.
She
Almost ignored it, until a message appeared. "I would like to see her." Claire went still. She knew that tone. Her father never wasted words when emotion made them dangerous. Somewhere, somehow, the image from the party had reached him. She slipped the phone into her coat pocket, took Ethan's hand, and walked him to the car through the rain. He chatted about spelling tests and Spirit Week, and Claire answered softly, but beneath her calm something old had begun to rise. Not fear. Not dread. Recognition. William Sinclair had seen something. And when men like her father chose to step closer, they did not arrive with noise. They arrived with consequence. By noon, the rain had cleared and left the city rinse clean, the sidewalks dark with drying water, and the air cool enough to sharpen every sound. Claire was at her desk in the design studio, reviewing fabric samples for a townhouse renovation in Back Bay, when the front door chimed and her assistant crossed the room holding a cream envelope on a silver tray that did not belong to them. Even before Claire touched it, she knew who had sent it. The paper was thick, nearly weightless in the hand, with her name pressed into the surface in a restrained serif that did not need decoration because the people behind it had never needed attention to prove importance. She waited until her assistant stepped away before sliding one finger beneath the seal. Inside was a single card. Sinclair Foundation Annual Education Gala. Friday, 7 o'clock.
Fairmont Capli Plaza.
Formal attire. And beneath the printed invitation, in a line written by hand, were 6 words in the same spare control she recognized from the message that morning. "It is time to come as yourself." Claire read it twice. Then once more. Around her, the studio moved in its usual rhythm.
Phones rang softly.
A client laughed near the sample wall. Someone carried espresso from the corner machine back to a drafting table. But the world inside Claire had shifted half an inch, and that was enough to make everything feel newly lit. She set the card down and stared through the glass partition into the street below, where taxis slid past in yellow flashes and pedestrians moved, with their collars turned up against the breeze. For years, she had built her life carefully around a mission. Not lies. Never lies. Just silence, placed with precision. She had not wanted Ethan growing up inside headlines or charity pages, or the polished attention that followed families like the Sinclairs. She had not wanted Jason measuring her through the lens of her father's reach. More truthfully, she had not wanted to discover what kind of man he became once proximity to power entered the room. Now she knew, and somehow that knowledge made the old secrecy feel less noble than it once had. Her phone buzzed again before she could fold the card back into the envelope. This time it was a text from Jason. "Big night Friday. Got invited to the Sinclair Gala. Huge networking opportunity. Vanessa is losing her mind over the dress code." Claire looked at the message without expression. A second bubble appeared. "You should see the guest list. Serious people."
She almost smiled at that.
Serious people. As if seriousness were something that could be rented for the evening like tuxedos and valet stands. She did not answer. Instead, she turned the invitation over and ran her thumb along the embossed crest in the corner, an old family mark so understated most people would miss it. Jason had not. Or rather, he had seen it and not understood what it meant, which was somehow more revealing. Later that afternoon, when Claire picked Ethan up from school, he came running across the sidewalk with a construction paper star taped to his sweater and a spelling test folded proudly in his hand. 98. He talked the entire drive home about Spirit Week, cafeteria pizza, and a boy in his class who had claimed jellyfish were technically immortal. Claire listened, asked questions, and let his voice keep the car warm. At a red light, she glanced at him in the rearview mirror. His face looked lighter than it had the day before. Childhood could recover quickly when love stayed steady around it. That, more than anything, hardened something calm inside her. This was no longer about enduring Jason. It was about ending the lesson his behavior might teach her son, if left unanswered. That evening, after dinner, Claire opened the back of her closet and pulled down the long white storage box she had not touched since the divorce. Inside lay dresses wrapped in tissue paper, all from another life, all elegant in the quiet, expensive way that never begged to be admired. She moved past black silk, midnight blue crepe, a narrow silver gown she had once worn to a winter benefit in Chicago, until her fingers stopped on one dress the color of pale pearl. Minimal lines.
Clean neckline. No glitter. No epalogy.
She lifted it carefully into the light. Ethan wandered into the doorway in dinosaur pajamas, brushing his teeth too early because he liked the blue toothpaste. "That looks fancy," he said through foam. Claire laughed softly. "It is." He tilted his head. "Are you going somewhere?" Claire looked at the dress, then at her son.
"Yes," she said.
"I think I am." Ethan nodded, as if that settled something larger than the question he had asked. He padded back down the hall, and Claire stood alone with the gown draped over one arm and the invitation resting on the bed behind her. Across town, Jason was probably congratulating himself already, imagining handshakes, business cards, and the warm glow of being seen in the right room. He had no idea that Friday night was not opening a door for him. It was closing one. And for the first time in years, Claire did not feel like she was being pulled into the past. She felt like the past had finally been asked to look directly at her. Friday arrived in a wash of cold white sunlight and the kind of spring air that made the city feel polished from the edges inward. Claire spent the day moving through ordinary things with unusual steadiness. She answered client emails, approved a lighting plan, picked Ethan up from school, and made him macaroni and cheese with broccoli on the side because he still insisted the broccoli tasted better when the cheese sauce touched it by accident instead of on purpose. By 6 o'clock, he was at her friend Nora's brownstone for the evening, building blanket forts with Nora's twin daughters and already forgetting to miss her. Claire stood in Nora's guest bathroom a few minutes later, fastening a pair of pearl earrings with fingers that did not shake. The dress lay against her frame exactly as she remembered, pale and fluid, skimming rather than clinging, elegant enough to command attention and quiet enough to make attention feel earned. She wore her hair swept back from her face, exposing the clean line of her neck and the calmness in her expression.
No glitter.
No visible effort. No trace of the woman Jason thought he had left behind in some smaller life. When her car pulled beneath the awning of the Fairmont Copley Plaza, the entrance glowed with warm gold light against the blue edge of evening. Valets moved quickly. Doormen in dark coats opened glass doors with practiced ease. Inside, the ballroom looked like a world arranged to flatter power without ever naming it. Crystal chandeliers dropped light like frozen rain. White orchids spilled from silver bowls at the center of linen-covered tables. A string quartet played near the far wall, their music threading beneath conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. Men in black tuxedos and women in silk and satin moved through the room with the unhurried confidence of people who were used to being welcomed. Claire stepped inside and felt it at once, that familiar shift in the air when a room notices someone before it understands why. She gave her name to the woman at the registration table. The woman looked up, checked the list, and her posture changed by a single respectful degree. "Welcome, Miss Sinclair," she said. "Not Bennett. Sinclair." The name landed softly, but Claire still felt it move through her like a bell struck underwater. She took her place inside it without flinching. Across the ballroom, Jason had just accepted a glass of champagne when he saw her. Claire watched the recognition hit him in stages. First surprise, then confusion, then the quick tightening around his mouth that meant he was trying to recover before anyone else noticed he had lost control of the moment. Vanessa, draped in an emerald gown that tried very hard to look expensive, turned beside him and followed his stare. Her smile paused, then sharpened. Jason crossed the floor with the eager confidence of a man who still believed every strange development could be bent back in his favor. "Claire," he said, as if the syllables belonged to him. "What are you doing here?" Claire took a slow sip of sparkling water before answering. "Attending the gala." Vanessa let out a light laugh. "Obviously," she said. "He means how did you get invited?" Claire turned her gaze to her, polite and unreadable. "The usual way." Jason gave a short laugh, too loud, already glancing around to see who might be listening. "Come on," he said. "This is not exactly your scene." It was such a familiar sentence that Claire almost admired its loyalty to the past. For years he had used versions of it to keep her just outside whatever door he was trying to enter. Not your crowd. Not your world. Not your level. He had always needed her slightly diminished, so he could feel enlarged beside her. Claire set down her glass on a passing tray. "You should enjoy your evening, Jason," she said.
No sharpness.
No heat. Just distance, clean as glass. But Jason was already off balance now, and off balance he became careless. "Still doing the mysterious thing, I see," he said. "Showing up where you do not belong and expecting people not to ask questions." Vanessa smiled at that, relieved to hear a tone she recognized. "Maybe she is here with someone," she added. "Maybe one of the caterers needed help." The line was cheap, and cheapness sounded different in a room built on actual wealth. Two guests nearby fell conspicuously quiet. Claire did not rescue them from the silence. She only looked at Jason with that same stillness that had unsettled him outside the birthday gate, the stillness of a woman who no longer needed an audience to know the truth. "You always did mistake composure for weakness," she said. Jason blinked. It was not the words. It was the fact that she had spoken them without effort. Before he could answer, a subtle movement passed through the ballroom. Conversations softened. Heads turned toward the entrance near the dais. Even the quartet seemed to draw their notes thinner, as if the room itself had taken a breath and chosen to hold it. Jason glanced over his shoulder, distracted. Claire did not. She already knew what kind of presence could change the temperature of a room without raising its voice. And somewhere beneath the chandeliers and polished silver and practiced smiles, she felt the evening begin to gather itself around the moment he had never seen coming. William Sinclair did not enter the ballroom the way other powerful men did. There was no performance in it, no smile meant for cameras, no pause designed to be admired. He simply appeared at the edge of the room in a black tuxedo cut with the kind of precision that made excess unnecessary, and the atmosphere changed around him as if wealth itself had just remembered its source. Conversations lowered without instruction. Men who had been laughing a moment earlier straightened almost unconsciously. Women who knew his name did not whisper it. They did not need to. Recognition moved faster than sound. Jason turned fully now, his face losing color by small degrees, the confidence draining out of him so subtly it might have gone unnoticed by anyone who had not spent years studying what embarrassment looked like when pride tried to outrun it. Vanessa glanced between the older man and the stage, then back at Jason, already sensing that something in the room had shifted beyond her understanding. Claire stood still. Her pulse was steady. That surprised her most. She had imagined this moment in abstract shapes over the past 2 days, but now that it was here, she felt no panic, only a strange and solemn clarity. William's gaze found her before anyone else. It did not wander. It did not hesitate. He crossed the ballroom with the same measured pace he would have used to enter a board meeting or a chapel, and every step seemed to peel away one more layer of Jason's assumptions. When William stopped in front of Claire, he looked at her for a long second, not as an investor appraising damage, not as a man arriving to own a room, but as a father confronting the visible evidence of what had been done to his daughter's dignity. There was grief in that look and restraint and something older than anger. He lifted one hand and lightly touched a strand of hair near her temple, a gesture so quiet it nearly hurt to witness.
You
"Look well," he said. His voice was low, even unmistakable. Claire held his gaze. "I am," she answered. It was not fully true, but it was true enough for now. William gave the smallest nod, as if he understood both the statement and the omission inside it. Then he turned. The movement was calm, but it cut through the room more sharply than any outburst could have. Jason opened his mouth, perhaps to introduce himself, perhaps to pretend this was all less catastrophic than it was, but William spared him only a brief glance. "Mr. Bennett," he said.
No words. No hostility.
Just recognition stripped of courtesy. Jason straightened as though his name, in that voice, had become a verdict. "Sir," he managed, forcing a smile that looked painful around the edges. "I had no idea Claire was connected to the foundation." William's expression did not change. "That is because my daughter has never needed my name to prove her worth." The sentence landed in the silence with the clean force of truth. Not loud, not theatrical, just final. Vanessa looked at Claire then, really looked at her, and something close to panic flashed behind the polish of her face. Around them, nearby guests had gone very still, each one pretending not to listen while missing nothing. Jason tried again, more carefully this time. "Of course. I only meant—" "I know what you meant," William said, and there was nothing to argue with in the way he said it. Then, with effortless precision, he shifted his attention to the event chair approaching from the dais and began discussing scholarship endowments, international school access, and a new education initiative as if Jason had already become irrelevant. It was that, more than anything, that broke the illusion Jason had lived inside. Not public humiliation. Not scolding. Erasure. The room followed William's lead instantly. A cluster of donors moved closer. A senator's wife smiled at Claire with renewed interest. A university president extended his hand and introduced himself as though she had always belonged there. Because she had. She always had. Jason stood only a few feet away, but for the first time since Claire had known him, he looked like a man who Understood, he had misjudged the architecture of the world. He had thought status was something you wore loudly, something you could seize by entering the right rooms and speaking with the right confidence. He had never understood the quieter kind, the kind that did not announce itself because it had no fear of being overlooked. Claire did not smile at him. She did not need to. She only stood beside her father beneath the chandelier light, composed and unmistakable, while the truth settled over the ballroom with the cold elegance of crystal. Jason had spent years trying to make her feel small in front of other people. And now, before the only audience he had ever truly wanted, he was finally seeing the scale of the woman he had failed to recognize. The applause followed Claire and William through the rest of the evening, though Claire never mistook it for respect. People approached with polished smiles, suddenly warm, suddenly attentive, as if her name had become more important than anything they had failed to notice before. Men Jason had spent the night trying to impress now turned toward Claire instead. Women who had barely acknowledged her an hour earlier greeted her with softened voices and careful questions. Claire answered with grace, but never more than necessary. She stayed beside her father through the scholarship presentation, listening as students spoke about debt, ambition, and the fragile math of opportunity, and felt something steady settle inside her. This was the difference between legacy and ego. One built, the other consumed. Later, in a quiet corridor lined with mirrors, cream marble, and white lilies, Jason found her. He no longer looked confident. "Why did you never tell me?" he asked. "Not I was wrong.
Not I am sorry."
Only the complaint of a man who still believed he had been denied something he deserved to know. Claire looked at him for a long moment. "Because when I was your wife," she said, "I wanted to know whether I mattered without it." Jason swallowed. "That is not fair," he said quietly. "You made it sound like you came from nothing." Claire held his gaze.
No.
"I let you assume I did." The truth landed cleanly. He looked away and she could almost see the regret rearranging itself inside him, not into love, not into grief, but into calculation too late to matter. Vanessa appeared at the far end of the corridor and stopped, sensing the shape of something already finished. Then Jason said, "I did not know." Claire's voice stayed calm. "That has never been the point. You should not have needed to know." He asked about Ethan, and for the first time there was something real in his face. Fear, perhaps.
Shame.
"I do not want him growing up thinking I am," he could not finish. Claire did it for him. Cruel. The word remained between them, exact and undeniable. She stepped closer just once. "Then do not be." A little later, she left the hotel, picked Ethan up from Nora's brownstone, and carried him half asleep to the car, his head warm against her shoulder. At home, after tucking him into bed, Claire stood by the window in the quiet and understood at last that she had not lost anything worth keeping. She had walked away with the only person who ever mattered, and with herself intact. That was a victory no audience could give, and no man could take away.